real man doesn't deliver on a Sunday.
If you don't like that, you don't like NBA basketball.
Anthony for three. Bang! J.R. Smith! We just saw men fly. LeBron James with no regard for human life.
Cleveland! This is for you!
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Coast to Coast. I'm Ronan Gaine. Joining me, as always, is Chris Nambu. We also got an old friend of the podcast, Tim Thornquist, joined us to talk some Boston Celtics.
Woo!
We had to do it, especially after last night's win. Obviously, they're the best team in basketball at the moment, but getting right into it, that win against the Suns, Tim, how good did that feel last night?
Well, it was a true test, and that's what the Celtics continue to do is they continue to prove any doubters wrong. And, they're the number one seed in the East up against the number one seed in the West at the time, because now the Pelicans are up there, but they completely they completely dismantled a team that has been dominating the regular season the past couple years, and they did it convincingly, and everything was gelling and everything about this team. It's just good vibes all around. And, I compare it to last year. Last year, if they go into Phoenix at 10 p.m. Eastern time, they get absolutely blown out or it's not a game. And this year was the complete polar opposite. And it's just, it's everything that this team has been striving for over the past 8-12 months, and it's been pretty exciting. And it's just, it's no surprise at this point, but I'm looking forward to the next game against the Warriors because, we got a bone to pick with them.
I want to talk about this game specifically, not just the end result. The end result is pretty obvious. They absolutely ran the Suns out of their home building. They made a big point on ESPN, national media, to just show how good they were. But I thought it was great to see how resilient they were in the first quarter. And that, to me, shows a lot because Chris Paul looked great in the minutes that he was playing in that first quarter, running pick and roll. And it just looked like at times the Celtics defense didn't have an answer for the pick and roll. And then Chris Paul goes to the bench and Celtics just get rolling. And there's just this never ending barrage. And does it feel different this year? Because I feel like the Celtics this year, it's not like in bursts. It's just all game long, the way that they move the ball on the floor, the way that they are able to find any shooters open, the way they play for each other. It just feels like they're constantly trying to pull away. It's not just in bunches.
Yeah, it's been consistent all year. Obviously, they've had a few bad games, and the main difference is the addition of Malcolm Brogdon coming off the bench. This team is the most well-rounded team that I've ever seen in my lifetime. Obviously, the 2008 Celtics are a team that's up there, but I was only 13, 14 at the time, so I didn't follow basketball as much as I am now. This team, the main difference is guys like Malcolm Brogdon coming off the bench. He's a legitimate starting point guard, starting guard, however you want to phrase it. He's coming off the bench. So this team has the reigning defensive player of the year in Marcus Smart. They have a legitimate MVP caliber player in Jason Tatum, who is certainly playing like it. They have an all-NBA player alongside in Jaylen Brown, and they have a sixth man that I don't see why Brogdon can't win the sixth man of the year. And so when the first unit is as powerful as they are, and then you bring in someone like Malcolm Brogdon, that's where the consistency feels as consistent as possible because you have somebody who is elite and knows what they're doing and could easily come in and be a starting point guard in 99, pretty much 100% of all teams. So that's the biggest difference is their backcourt when they're healthy. Flip in Rob Williams and you have Derek White, Malcolm Brogdon leading the second unit. Those two guards can easily be starting guards on most teams in the NBA. And so that's why this team feels so consistent because their depth. It's as deep as they've ever been.
Yeah. No, it's really impressive. I think Brogdon's obviously the main one. You think about the gravity. When the Celtics made that move, it just felt like a power move. They flexed their muscle and they went out and got him. And he's a guy that you could easily be a second or third star on a lot of teams in the NBA, but the Celtics have him coming off the bench, so consistent, averaging 14, 4 and 4, obviously shooting great. He's been a 50-40-90 guy before, so he's going to be really
about to be
efficient.
a 50-50-90 guy.
He's
yeah,
pushing that.
Unbelievable.
But I mean, when you have that sort of power coming in off the bench, it's something that they didn't have last year. Obviously, you didn't notice it as much with the way they work the rotations. You kind of usually have one of Brown or Tatum on the floor anyway, so you wouldn't notice it as much. But the impact that he's making so far shows that they were missing that piece, and that it was good to see the front office on their toes. They spotted that little bit of a gap, and they went and made that move as soon as they possibly could.
Yeah, no, credit to Brad Stevens. He's hit on all cylinders for every move that he's made. And really just the addition of Derek White and Malcolm Brogdon to this team is exactly what they needed. Consistent point guards that can score the ball and play great defense. And so it's credit to him all around with bringing in the right pieces, because to your point, Ronan, that's exactly what they were missing in the NBA Finals. And now they have someone coming off the bench that could legitimately be a second or third star on most teams. It's just, they're flexing their muscles and they're a powerhouse. They're an absolute wagon right now.
I feel like the cool thing about adding Brogdon was not just like his overall talent, but how well he meshes with what the team wants to do. And he does basically what they want from Derek White at an elite level and more consistently. And I can't really think of another team in the league that has this much like repetition. Like no matter who's coming out onto the court, they have such similar tools that they can constantly be playing the same way, that they're not losing. If someone gets hurt or if maybe someone's having an off game, the next man up mentality is there in a way that it's not just a mentality, but it's about their talent too. Like if White's not having the game, you got Brogdon. And I think too, big credit I want to give to Marcus Smart. I mean, how do you feel like he's played this season? Because I feel like he's had a significant impact, not just with his defense, but how he's decided to play as a playmaker this season compared to the last few seasons.
Yeah, it's noticeable with just by watching the games, his assist totals and everything. He's shown over the past year plus, but specifically this season, that he can really pass the ball. And when you have scorers like Tatum and Brown, you need somebody that can be a true facilitator. And Smart is kind of stepping into that role. I've noticed that he's not, throwing up a bunch of shots. He's really playing into his role. I think he loves the fact that he was Defensive Player of the Year, and now he wants to translate that into the offense. And he understands that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum can take you to 30 points per night. And then you have a guy like Brogdon who can come off the bench and give you 15, 20 points any given night. So his game has been, it's been refreshing, because in years past, I felt pretty frustrated at times because he throws up a lot of circus threes, tough shots. You don't quite know if he knows his role. It's solidified that I feel like he knows his role. He's a defensive-minded player, but also he can be a great playmaker that this team desperately needs. And as long as he's doing that, then he's the perfect fit as the starting point guard.
Yeah, I mean, the shot selection is so huge, and just taking down those bad shots and looking for the best shot. I mean, there's a reason, and we'll get into the stats eventually here, but like there's a reason why the Celtics are the best offense in the league by a margin. And I'd argue that this is the best 3-point shooting, and I don't think there's a big argument against it. If this is how they're going to play for the rest of the season, this is going to be the best shooting team in probably league history. Like you go back 20 years, you're not going to find a team that's shooting at the volume that they're shooting at this efficiency. Not even close. And Marcus Smart just taking smarter shots and being such a good connector. I mean, there are a lot of times where we talked last year about compounding effects of Jaylen Brown wanting to take mid-range shots, Jason Tatum wanting to take a lot of fadeaways, both those guys trying to figure out what their individual games were like. And then Marcus Smart wanting to do the same thing with his shot from the 3-point line. And for him to this year be so much more of a connecting piece to get other guys involved. I mean, that's what's empowered all these shooters on this team. And it's great. I mean, these guys, dude, like Sam Hauser being a elite 3-point shooter, and Al Horford still being just an absolute flamethrower. Like it was like every single week at the end of the season last year, I was like, all right, this is going to fall off eventually, but it just hasn't. So I don't know. I guess this is just Al Horford now. And I guess Blake Griffin also apparently is an elite 3-point shooter on this team, but everyone gets open looks because of guys like Marcus Smart who are making that sort of pass, and screening for each other. I mean, these guards screen for each other. They're not just that, they're threats in so many different ways, which I think is just a testament to Mazzulla and like how this team is able to play for each other. I mean, they're setting down pin down screens for each other. They're running off screens. They're able to do just everything. I think this is probably the most in sync team in the league right now.
Yeah, I agree 100%. They believe in each other. It shows, and just the fact that everyone knows their roles, it's playing out exactly how it should. And they got all the right pieces for it to come together the way that they're coming together, and it comes down to everybody just knowing their roles. So spot on with that.
Yeah. Before we get a bit more into Boston and the stats, you could arguably question their rotation of bigs. Is some element. Obviously, we know Robert Williams is still to come back, but at the same time, Robert Williams is a guy that you really have to kind of wrap in cotton wool and just kind of hope for the best. He's had his injury problems. So should the Boston Celtics be having a look at Jakob Poeltl? Should they be interested in making that trade? I know the Spurs are obviously they're asking for 2 first-rounders, but that may be a bit much. But is that someone who should be on the watch list for Boston?
So that was a name that I think I might have even texted you, Nambu, about, and it seemed like it would be a perfect fit because the first 5 to 6 or 7 games, that was my biggest concern with this team was rebounding, and they need somebody that can be an elite rebounder, especially with Time Lord being out and being as fragile as you alluded to. But honestly, the surprising emergence of Luke Cornett, I'm ready to ride that for the rest of the year. He's shown himself that he can be a viable backup, especially come in when players are down. And also Blake Griffin, he's a veteran that's come in and he knows what he can do. He can play his role. I don't think the Celtics need to make that trade because they're thriving. And with Al Horford and Time Lord, and then having somebody like Luke Cornett or Blake Griffin and even Noah Vonleh, the team feels like they don't need to add anything. They don't need to subtract anything. And although the name sounded great in the first 2-3 weeks of the season, from the past 20 games, as a Celtics fan, I don't see why we would make any move. This team is really thriving, and they're going to get Time Lord back in about 2 weeks. And I would say push him back to even 2 more weeks, give him 2 more weeks to recover. But I wouldn't do that. But it was something that I thought about, Ronan.
I think that's fair.
I would say no, and I would say, and I think this will transition when we'll talk about Rob a little bit, but I don't want anybody on this team that's going to take away from the kind of spacing that they've created here. With the 5-out spacing, with the amount of perimeter movement that they've had. I mean, like, shout out to Grant Williams here too. Like, dude is like a wing this year. Plays like a wing. Put the ball on the floor. Not just play make after he's attacking closeouts, but actually finishing at the rim and taking step back threes. Like, I have not looked up. I need to check the tracking on his step back threes, but this dude has just been unreal. But having 5 guys out there that can do that from the perimeter is huge. And I wouldn't want a guy like Poeltl out there who's a bit more of a lumbering big. I don't know how much switching you can do. I think the Celtics are so good when they're able to switch 1 through 5, and I don't know how much repetition you need once you get Rob back. And for the rebounding too. I mean, I had the same concern about defensive rebounding, but we're gonna keep up. We could bring up Brogdon in literally every category that we were worried about the Celtics, and he's contributed there. Like, their guards, especially Brogdon, are such good rebounds. How many times have you seen Brogdon just fly in from the weak side and just grab an offensive board? How many times you see Derek White fight for boards? Like, all these guards are hungry for boards. Tatum's a good rebounder. I think they'll be fine without that. But when Tyler comes back, I mean, how do you figure he fits into this offense? Because you just talked about like how repetitive, in a good way, their offensive system is, no matter who's on the floor. How do you slot him in and get him involved in a way that doesn't kind of mess with what they're doing right now?
Well, obviously when they bring him in, slowly but surely ramp him up. I'm talking really low minutes, like 10 minutes a night for the first couple weeks or so. But just by having him out there, he's a lob threat that's going to force the defense to be aware of that, which is going to open up more shot making. And his perimeter defense is not bad. He's an elite defender, and I don't see it really skipping a beat. And I just think with the offensive power that this team has, as you even mentioned with Grant Williams, his shot has been excellent last year, and it's turned even better this year. And so with someone like Time Lord, when you're having someone like Al Horford that is still thriving at his age and everything that's going on around him, I don't see that that's stagnating any offense. And it's only going to empower it to be more respectable down low, because you have that lob threat, and someone like Marcus Smart, who's an elite passer, is going to get him those opportunities, and it's going to force a defense to be respectful on all phases, which is just a dangerous game for any team.
Yeah, that's I agree with that. I think there's not really been a real vertical threat on the Celtics. I mean, Luke Cornett's probably their best vertical threat right now, and that's not really saying a lot. How many lobs have we seen this season? So I really hope that the health is there, because I think they really need that. That really completes them offensively. They can find a way to incorporate that. And in fact, I don't see how that doesn't even create more open looks with his gravity rolling to the rim, being in the dunker spot, how much that's going to force defenses to respect him inside. And Mazzulla, I think Ronan wants to talk to Mazzulla, because like that, I have faith in the adjustments he can make. Obviously, a lot of credit's going to go towards the coach if the team is playing well, and this is a team that was together last year. You can argue continuity, but I'd say that there's a lot to be said for how well this team is playing and how it looks. The product looks different offensively, and I think credit's definitely got to go to him for that.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, the way the situation played out with everything that happened with Udoka. And then he's suspended for the year, and then you're going to bring in a guy that was on his coaching team, and then is Udoka just going to come back in then next year? No problem. Like nothing ever happened. Like what way do you judge what this new coach does based off what obviously what Udoka did last year and everything that he brought to this team? He brought them to a different level than they were at under Brad Stevens, which was obviously still a good level, but not at that elite level that they needed to get. And now it feels like they've taken another step this year. So like, where did the front office, what way do they judge on whether or not to continue with Mazzulla, or did they just bring back Udoka next year? What do you think on that side of it?
Well, they absolutely should not bring back Udoka. Given the circumstances, yeah. But also Mazzulla, he deserves to be the head coach. Anytime you bring a team up to 21-5 after last year, he has proven himself. There's been times where I don't like that. Sometimes he doesn't call timeouts when it's a good timeout situation. He also, in certain situations, leaves too many players out when they should bring them back to the bench and give them more rest. So that's something that I expect to be cleaned up. But from a front office perspective, you got to look at the guy and see everything that transpired with Udoka in that situation. And immediately when that happened, I thought to myself, well, we're going to be right back to where it was at the beginning of last year, and things might not gel as well as they were. And in fact, they've gotten even better. And so there has to be credit to the coach for keeping things as gelled as they are. And definitely do not bring back Udoka. And I think Mazzulla deserves the head coaching job. And just because of the job he's been doing, there's obviously some growing pains with a first-time interim head coach. But with the team that he has around him, he's destined for success, and I wouldn't mess with it, especially with the way that this team is looking.
Yeah, I mean, if growing pains is being like by far the best team in the NBA, like I'll take that 100 times out of 100. But I think it'd be very different. Like it'd be very different if Jason Tatum was having an MVP season and he's just like doing it all on his own. But
right,
you can see from a system point of view, like what the Celtics are trying to achieve as a team. And I think that's why, I mentioned earlier today about how the Celtics mood is very appropriate for what they're trying to do this season. Like they're never too high on their success. I mean, the fact that Mazzulla is talking about open shots missed after just absolutely blowing out the Suns team. Talking about something like that and adjustments that they need to make because of that. Like that is a locked in team that's focused on the process, that's focused on getting better in every little way. And that's the type of team that's going to be in the finals. And that's the type of coach that's really influencing a locker room to stay focused in on that. So I think you have to keep Mazzulla around just because of what he's done here. There's no reason to shake it up. And I think you see that very commonly with young coaches, with new coaches, like leaving guys in and giving a little too much burn. But yeah, I think the timeouts thing, they've played at such the better pace. I feel like a lot of times they're just trying to keep the pressure on. They're trying to maintain pace, but it'll be interesting because playoff time, that's the biggest point in time where you need to be smart with your timeouts. You need to be smart with the flow of the game and when to give your guys rest or not.
And that's also when we find out if they're not just another Phoenix Suns team. You know, the Suns did this last year too. If we don't, let's not forget about that element of it either. But we won't get too far ahead of ourselves on that one, I don't think. But we got to talk a bit about the lead two guys. I mean, Tatum and Brown. A lot of people talking about them as the best duo in the league, and they're not far off. I think for sure Jaylen Brown, for me, he's the best number 2 in the league, especially when you look at it just as, obviously there's teams where the number 2 isn't like identified. You think of like a LeBron AD or a KD Kyrie sort of thing. It's not like 100%, he's the number 1, he's the number 2. You look more like when you think of guys like Morant and Bane or Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, that sort of thing, where you know it's this guy's team. He's the second star. Maybe within the team, they believe they're on a level playing ground, but obviously the media, the outside, you're always going to think it's this guy's team. He's playing the number 2. I don't think there's anyone better than Jaylen Brown. And the way he's playing this year, outstanding, all NBA level, no doubt.
Yeah, you could also reference Giannis and Middleton, but Jaylen Brown exceeds Middleton by far, and it seems like each and every year Tatum and Brown continue to get better, and they continue to push each other to be better. And I couldn't agree more with what you just said, Ronan, that there isn't a better number 2. And Jaylen Brown he's not just an all-star, he's an all-NBA player. And this is going to give him the most opportunity to make the most money with Boston, which means that there should be no reason why they don't lock Tatum and Brown up for the next 5 years. And all of a sudden we've dealt with a stretch of almost 10 years of them dominating in Boston sports, and hopefully they continue to get better. And they're both very young. And you can notice Jaylen Brown's offensive skills they're skyrocketing each and every year. And it's been a joy to see, because when he first came into the league, he wasn't much of a scorer. He didn't shoot the ball all that well. Now when he puts up threes, it's a real good shot of it going in. And yeah, they look really good together. It's been awesome, because about this time last year, the biggest concern was, should they break this up? Should they trade Jaylen Brown because he had the most trade value? Should they trade Marcus Smart? And they've stuck through with it, and they've been thriving. It's been a joy to watch.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the beginning part of his career, because that really got me thinking about my initial impressions of him as a player. And it's always good. It's always good for people to admit they're wrong about players, because I mean, all these guys have so much talent, and there's so many factors going into why they develop or don't develop in the way that they do. And Jaylen Brown is just like the poster child of like a blank slate, high talent wing athlete there's always guys like that every single draft where it's like, oh, if only you could give him ball skills and better IQ and like shooting. And like every year he just put it together little by little. And to the point where now you're talking about him as an all NBA guy. I mean, he's a guy who literally like did not have a bag. He did not have dribble skills. He did not have a shot. Like, he was a very high level athlete and just a raw defender. But now, like, you look at him as a legitimate defensive stopper. And for wing stoppers, how often are you going to see guys who are also going to be able to get to the mid range and really like go into ISO? You could put him in pick and roll situations. You can play him off the ball. Like, he's such a underrated, versatile offensive threat. And I love that you brought it up too, Ronan, because like when you talk about these teams, like in the media, we love to think like, We as if we're brothers, but fans and media love to think about like who's the number one guy, number two guy. But these guys, like the mentality that they've had, it's been always the best. They've always talked about each other's equals. It's never been this feeling of like it's anybody's team. But yeah, crazy to see where Jaylen Brown is at right now. Like you saw it from Tatum. Like Tatum's obviously that blue chip talent, and like he was supposed to be where he's at now. Right now, like you wanted him to be a dominant, like top 10 player. You're happy that he got here. But Jaylen Brown, for him to build brick by brick into the player that he is now, it's so impressive. And that contract, it's going to be interesting the next couple of years. Like obviously you have the team. Like this is the tough part, is getting the guys on the team. And the Celtics have done such an unbelievable job, you know, finding the right trades, finding the right guys to draft, the right stars. But Grant Williams coming up next year, like that's going to be a huge signing. And then Jaylen Brown the following year. Like it's going to be interesting to see how Brad figures this one out, because I mean they're going to be like super deep in the tax, or maybe they're going to have to make a couple other moves to fit everybody on this team, because Grant Williams is absolutely going to demand. I mean, what do you think he's going to demand per year? Like
he's going to be. It's going to be around 20 million.
Yeah, I
for
agree.
sure. With the way that he is on the defensive end and the way his 3-pointer shot looks, because anytime he does a pump fake and he takes a step to the right or to the left, he's making it more often than not. And so that is the most valuable shot that any NBA player can have, and especially someone who can play the 4, also sometimes the 5 if they're going with a small lineup. I see him commanding no less than 20 million.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, anyone who, like, no one can say less than 20. Like, and I'd be shocked if a team like the Rockets, for example, like they are going to have the number 1 cap space, and having a guy like Grant Williams and a team like that that's trying to be competitive, that's trying to learn how to win, like they're going to throw a ton of money at Grant's way.
Right.
Now I'm trying to, so if you're on one dribble, you shoot in 50% from 3 on this side.
Really? That's insane. You know, I was going to say it feels like that, but you know, that's a great stat, and that's something that's going to get you paid.
That is insane.
And rightfully so. I mean, players are out there trying to, obviously they try to play for these big contracts. Maybe Grant Williams is never going to be a max contract guy or a super max guy, but that doesn't mean he's not going to demand a big payday when his contract comes up. And the Celtics would be, they'd be brave if they thought they could definitely find someone to deliver at his level.
Yeah, you can't replace a guy like that. That's what's so, like, you'd be hard pressed to find a guy like PJ, or I was going to say PJ Tucker, but what Grant Williams has done is totally eclipsed that, because I thought that would be a really great outcome for Grant Williams, is to be a PJ Tucker, is to be able to defend. You know, I mean, times PJ Tuckers can defend 1 through 5, and I think Grant Williams can do that. And that's a really tough discussion saying who's better at doing it, but they're both pretty comparable. But PJ Tucker can't put the ball on the floor like Grant Williams can. And like Grant Williams he's no Kyrie Irving, you know, he's not doing anything crazy, but he is a reliable slasher. He can do things off the dribble. But like, find another guy like that at his size, his positionless defense, and at this point, like now he's progressing to even like playing the wing position on offense. Like who else is doing that at a high level?
And also, don't forget that Grant Williams missed his first 25 or 26 3-pointers to start out his career. So that's another testament to how hard he's worked. And so it's beautiful, but you can't replace that. You'd have to draft somebody and have them groom into a player like that, which is super hard to do.
Yeah. And I'll throw this out there too. Catch and shoot threes, 45.6%. On pull-up threes, you're shooting 54.5%. Like,
those are crazy numbers.
I can't even begin to like describe how shocking that is, because like his shot, this only became a development, I feel like, at what point? Like halfway through the year last season? Like,
yeah.
When it's like actually, okay, you can shoot.
Yep. Very valid.
We were still all mesmerized in Game 7 against the Bucks. So I mean,
yeah,
yeah, for real.
Let's throw that in. I gotta defend my statement from earlier, and I didn't do all this research for nothing. But in terms of the 3-point shooting, they're shooting 40% as a team from three. They're attempting 41 threes per game. That's the insane part. That's the insane part. And they're shooting better than those two historic Warriors teams from this decade. And basically, you look back 20 years, like nobody comes close to the amount of attempts. Like the best 3-point shooting teams are shooting like from the 90s, like shooting 17 threes a game. And it's probably wide open because Michael Jordan is all the way in the paint going 1-on-5. So like they're shooting just a couple percentile behind those teams, and they're taking like 30 more threes a game. Like this is, I think, by the end of the season, definitively the best 3-point shooting team ever. And that's just, I don't know, that's jaw dropping. Do you want to talk some defense too? Because I think we are overreacting a bit.
I would love to. My first initial thoughts about the defense was, this elite defense from last year, the number one ranked defense from last year, and this year it hasn't necessarily translated. But looking at the stats, I still think that they're a top 10 defense, and with the addition of Robert Williams, they'll certainly improve. But I also think that as the year moves along, they're going to start getting better with their defense. And it's just the way that the new NBA is. It's an offensive-driven league, and the Celtics, as you mentioned, has kept up with that, attempting around 41 threes per game. They're putting an emphasis on scoring. I fully expect throughout the year that their defense is going to improve, especially with the addition of one of their best defenders in Time Lord.
Yeah. And they're not.
Look at that last night. Last night, the defense was all there. They absolutely nullified the Phoenix Suns. They nullified Devin Booker, one of the hottest scorers in the entire NBA. They're still the 11th ranked defense in the NBA. And then obviously their offense is just on another level. And you always know, like when Chris sent this on to me, we couldn't all be all love and all everything's great. We had to kind of put in a few question marks. But when you look at the defense, it just had that feeling that it was gonna keep on getting better. Any given game, it was capable of stepping up, and it was slowly gonna get better. And they'll know that when it gets to crunch time and we're getting towards March and April, they'll want to have the defense firing on all fronts then, rather than having it at the top level now and possibly regressing.
Yeah, and I gotta say that I feel like it's already changing my perception of the defense, and I think what the reality is of their defense. Because in the past 10 games, that a defense rating of 111, I think that puts them around 7th, but right there in the top 10 defense, and that's again without Rob Williams. And I think I point to the game against the Nets too, a few games back, where you're facing Kevin Durant in the fourth quarter in a close game. By the end of the game, that they forced Kevin Durant to 8 turnovers, and he's still. It's funny whenever you talk about playing defense against Kevin Durant, because you talk about a good defensive game against Kevin Durant, he scores 30 on you, but it's in the way that you force him to score 30 on you. And
Celtics know how to deal with with Kevin Durant. You don't remember the playoffs last year?
Oh yeah. Forcing Kyrie Irving to 33% shooting, and they have all the tools. And as they continue to go throughout the season, I'd be curious to see how much better they look with a guy like Rob Williams behind them. But Tim, do you feel like they're playing defense a little bit differently? Are they scrambling more? Are they just a little bit lazy on rotations? Like what's kind of led to a slower start on defense?
I think that it's kind of to what Ronan was alluding to, that each and every game they're going to get better and better. So to start a season, some teams are rusty, some teams are not firing on all cylinders, and this team certainly feels like the longer the season is going, the more things are improving. What I did notice with the defense is that they generally start to ramp it up in the fourth quarter. So in crunch time, it seems like it's a lot better. But you got to acknowledge that Al Horford's another year older. Without Time Lord, there's going to be a big hole about a dominant big. And Tatum's taken a step forward. Jaylen Brown's taken a step forward. Marcus Smart is who he is. And so I don't know if they're doing anything differently other than missing one of their top defenders in Rob Williams. Although that's not the best answer. It's just my gut feeling. And when he comes back, I fully anticipate it to get even stronger.
Yeah, it's a big difference. I mean, what you can play so much differently. How much ball pressure you can put on the perimeter. You can play more drop coverage with Rob Williams. You can be a little bit more aggressive, knowing that there's a guy like there on the back end to clean up any mistakes. It's not just about the blocks, but it's about just. I mean, Rob Williams, I think, is such an underrated defender. Maybe he's appropriately rated to most people now, but what he does as like a free safety on defense on the weak side, just preventing anybody from getting in there, and everyone has him on the back of their mind. Like when he is on the floor, like he could be in the paint in like the blink of an eye. Like I think he's probably, conjure up best weak side defenders, best help defenders in the paint. I think about him. I think about Draymond. I think about Giannis, Bam. Like he's up there in terms of like best rim protector, best help defender. And it's probably right. If they're top 5 defense, if they're top 10 defense, like that's do we get to the penultimate question? Like, are they the championship favorite at this point? Is that too much to say already? Only 25, 26 games in the season.
Absolutely. Right now, the talk of the nation is Tatum for MVP, and can this team be stopped? And I'll tell you, they're reminding me a lot of like the 2014 Spurs. They lose the finals in heartbreaking fashion, and then they come back and they absolutely blow through the league. And in that year, the Spurs I think they had a perfect month. And this team feels like, that's very difficult to do. But this team has the capabilities to be just like that. And if they're a top 5, top 10 team in both categories, they're absolutely the favorite to win the championship. And, a team like Phoenix, although they're dominant in the regular season, they're a team that you think of out of the West, who comes out of the West, and they just blew them out by almost 40 points last night. So obviously we're 25 games in. There's still a lot of basketball to be played, but there isn't a team that is as well-rounded as the Boston Celtics, and their biggest addition is going to be somebody who hasn't played in a few months from surgery and is one of their best defenders, is probably their best defender. And so they're absolutely the favorites in my opinion. And I'm not just trying to speak with some biasness.
I'm sure there's no bias.
I think that's probably fair to have a little bit of bias at the stands. But all right, let's put it this way then. The Celtics are the favorites. I think it's very clear that when they've been the best team so far. Who's the biggest threat to them winning it all? Does it come from the East or does it come from the West? Who's their biggest threat?
It's the real NBA championship is going to be the Eastern Conference Finals against the Milwaukee Bucks. And so they are the biggest threat. They always have been, and they always will be. And there's a huge drop-off from the Celtics and the Bucks. Whoever wins that series is likely going to be the NBA champion. And that's why the real championship is going to be the Eastern Conference Finals. And that's going 7 games. I don't care how good the Celtics look. When you have someone like Giannis and as good of a team as the Bucks, that's a 7-game series. And that's why it needs to be in Boston. They need to be the number 1 seed. And just as good as the Celtics have been, the Bucks have been just as good. They're only 2 games behind them. And so that's the biggest threat right there.
So well, that depends on a lot. We've talked about the Warriors a little bit. I don't know if it was last week or before that, but Tim, do you think the Warriors regression is real? Or is this just early season woes?
It's tough to say. They're a great team at home, but they're a horrible team away. And so you got to put some stake in both of those. So if you can't be good at home and be bad away, because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be playing that pivotal game on your home floor. And so I'm not sure if the regression is real. Obviously, they have Steph Curry, but I do think that Klay Thompson has taken a step back, and Andrew Wiggins is not as dominant or at least he doesn't feel as dominant. So it's 50-50 in my opinion, but the real test will happen on Saturday night.
You watched last night's game. It was you saw regression with that choke that they had.
yeah, big time. That was unbelievable. Lack of defense from Klay Thompson and just a complete meltdown. But that's what the Jazz are doing, and they're rolling.
I don't think that's a hot take, though, to be honest. Like if you look at the West, like how the Celtics would match up, I think I'm a huge, ever since the beginning of the season, I'm a huge believer in the Pelicans. I think they have not really put it fully together yet, and they're just starting to figure things out. I mean, Brandon Ingram's been hurt a lot this beginning part of the season. That's a team that I think could match up really well with the Celtics, and Zion is a guy who could definitely be a bit of a game breaker in the way the Celtics are playing defense. But I mean, the Suns were supposed to be another team that you'd put a lot of faith in them to match up well. We'll see what happens when Cam Johnson gets back, but just as a side on the Suns, we expected to see more progression from Bridges and Johnson for them to be better, and that's not happened in a big way for you to expect for them to be a big threat. But that's a big test. I mean, the Bucks are going to be the test. The Cavs too. That the Celtics are perfect against winning teams this season, except for the Cavs, and that's a very, very quietly dominant team. I mean, they've had a few off nights here and there, but for a team that's just acquired a new star, still trying to figure things out, that's another team I think that would be a great playoff matchup. I don't think the Celtics want to see the Cavs early on in the playoffs, but the Bucks, I mean, obviously, but do you not see I see the Cavs that's potential there. There's potential.
I know the Celtics have had 2 heartbreaking losses against the Cavs, but yeah, it would be an amazing playoff series, but I don't see them as a legitimate threat like I would see the Bucks. And, maybe that's just my lack of believing in that team. They're a great team. They're very well-rounded, and they definitely have the pieces to be a contender and a championship winning team. But I don't see the Cavs beating the Celtics in a 7-game series. And I'm not sure if I even see the Cavs beating the Bucks in a 7-game series. And so that's why, although the Celtics have 2 tough losses against the Cavs, both were in overtime and both were by 1 or 2 points. So I don't see them as high of a threat as I would as the Milwaukee Bucks.
Yeah, that'll be the matchup. And this Saturday, that should be really good to see how they if they continue this dominant tour, if the Warriors continue to kind of disappoint. But yeah, I really don't see the stats prove it. Stats prove that the Celtics are far and away the best team in the league. No one's really standing up to them right now, except for a couple magical games with the Bulls and 2 magical games with the Cavs. But it's been fun to watch, man. I'm really happy for you guys. I'm really happy to see that this team stayed together after all that nonsense this offseason. That could have derailed a team that's trying to get back to the ultimate goal. And yeah, it's cool to see them continue to build that this season.
I mean, it's always great.
Absolutely.
It's great to have Boston back on top. Like everyone always says, we know they're the 2 staple franchises. Obviously, the Lakers are struggling a bit, but when Boston and LA are in the conversation, they're being talked about. The NBA is just better, and at the moment, the Boston Celtics rule. But I think that's going to do it for today's episode. I'm Ronan Gaine. He's Christian Nambu. Our thanks to Tim Thornquist who are joining us.